Hello, my name is Anne-Laure Gassin, and I work in communications at the European Food Safety Authority, EFSA. Now, I would like today to talk to you about risk communications and our work in this area. EFSA provides independent scientific advice on risks associated either directly or indirectly with the food chain. We have a very broad remit ranging from farm to fork, and our scientific advice helps public authorities, both at EU level and in the member states, to protect consumers, animals, and the environment from any risks associated with food. But what is risk communications? Well, the aim of risk communications is to provide people with information so that they can make their own informed decisions about whether a risk is acceptable or not, or whether they need to take action in order to prevent or reduce the risk. Now, when communicating about risk, it's very important for a scientific organization like EFSA to keep in mind that we need to bridge the gap between science and the consumer, because experts and the public have very different risk approaches. They have different perception of risk, different ways of communicating about risk. They have different information needs. And whereas scientists can readily analyze and assimilate and extrapolate from massive amounts of technical data in carrying out what is called a risk assessment, distinguishing between what is a hazard, a possible threat, and an actual risk, depending on whether consumers are indeed exposed to that hazard, we as consumers rely mainly on perception, and we're concerned about what does this risk mean for me, or what does it mean for vulnerable groups like babies, infants, pregnant women. We're more worried generally about risks which are man-made rather than those which are natural, even though natural does not necessarily mean safe, as we know. We're also more willing to accept those risks that we take on voluntarily. So I was struck, for instance, to read on a BBC website in a sector completely separate from the food area, an Australian surfer talking about possible risk of shark attacks. And he said, well, yeah, there's a threat out there, but shark attacks don't happen very often. It's a risk that most people are willing to take. Now, maybe surfers are willing to take that risk when they go surfing, but we as consumers, when we eat foods every day, we expect those foods to be nutritious, healthy, and of course, safe. So for EFSA and any organization communicating about risk, it's very important to understand how the consumer perceives risk and what they consider to be risks associated with food. So with that in mind, let's look at this map. This is a map of top consumer concerns expressed in the context of research that we were able to commission, a Eurobarometer. It's a pan-European consumer research on consumer perception on food-related risks. And there we see through this map, which by the way is not a weather map, that consumers tend to be more worried about chemical rather than biological risks. We see in a full circle here that in some 12 member states, consumers said that their #1 concern were pesticides in foods, whereas in only 3 member states, represented here by a diamond, consumers stated that food poisoning or risk from foodborne diseases was a risk, and indeed those are public health threats. Consumers also mentioned food quality issues, even though those aren't necessarily food safety issues as such, but food quality, freshness of food, both in the south, in the north of Europe. The welfare of farmed animals is more a concern we see here in the UK, in Sweden and Finland, in the north of Europe. And concern about new technologies such as GMOs is a concern in Austria, for instance. So you see that with this diversity, it's not possible for EFSA to put out one single message and expect to be understood by over 500 million consumers. It's very important for us to work closely with our partners in the member states, with the national food safety agencies, so that when we put out a message, they can also relay that message and ensure that their consumers, their stakeholders, understand fully the communications. So I hope that from these few minutes you will see how fascinating and complex the world of food risk communications is. Through this video series, we'll be updating you on the work that we are undertaking in this area, together with our partners in the member states, with the European Commission, and in liaison with our stakeholders. Thank you very much.